Section 1. Alignment in necessity. I believe a good analogy for humanity's present situation on Earth is like a crew aboard a large wooden ship lost in the middle of the ocean. The ship is of a type that must be rowed with oars to move, and designed in a way that anyone can row in any direction they wish. On this particular ship, we find that everyone can't agree on which direction to row in, making the ship move erratically. Occasionally, there happens to be enough people rowing in the same direction to move the ship one way, but this group still has to contend with the ship veering one way or another, thanks to all the other stubborn people rowing in different directions. As a spectator of the crew, the solution is obvious to us. Everyone should row in the same direction. Even if they don't know where the nearest port is, we know that their odds of mutual survival are better if they arbitrarily agreed on a direction rather than fighting and remaining stranded. Although different segments of the crew have rigid opinions about where to row, the root of the disagreement is that no one knows where the nearest port is. Everyone is guessing. Since group survival is more important than holding on to a guess, if there was a way to discern the right direction to port above everyone's opinion, the problem would be mostly resolved. Suppose night falls and the North Star becomes visible. Our crew would now be able to orient themselves cardinally. Then a crude map is found on board, and it is discerned the nearest port is somewhere westward. Now there is no question which general direction our survivors should be heading, and some alignment of rowing becomes possible. While the exact line to the nearest port is unclear, potentially resulting in some adversarial rowing, everyone plainly sees that the ship does consistently move westward and faster than it has ever moved before. Just as the survivors on the ship need a common direction to move forward effectively, humanity as a whole requires a shared sense of purpose to navigate the challenges we all face. In the case of our survivors, a meaningful alignment is only made possible due to the less subjective nature of the North Star and crude map. Yet even though these tools reduce subjectivity for them, does that really mean all of humanity should consider looking for something similar that can be used to reduce subjectivity across all people? The underlying question is whether or not subjectivity is worth reducing. Suppose an individual decides that any meaning that is subjectively satisfying is truly meaningful. It should be considered that choosing a purpose is not exactly a harmless decision, primarily because if everyone held their subjective meanings absolutely, it would make any alignment almost impossible. After all, we live in a world of finite amounts of resources for a finite amount of time. If two groups happen to find meaning in totally opposite or incompatible subjective things, the natural scarcity of resources will inevitably lead to conflict. This kind of misalignment is currently the norm. On the other hand, if some purpose is shared between people, we can observe they seem to suffer less and achieve more through collaboration. History and life today is full of examples of this. Nations, armies, businesses, religions, ideologies, and movements all exist because a group of individuals have decided to align their purpose to some degree. Considering this, the problem of inevitable conflict can be resolved by subjectively agreeing on a single shared purpose. Of course, this alignment of purpose isn't a particularly novel revelation. It is something we all intuitively know. However, if we know we would be better off rallying around any arbitrary purpose, why is there still so much suffering and conflict in the world? The problem is that subjectivity inhibits permanent alignment. Even if everyone agrees on a subjective purpose, it doesn't become less subjective because it is universal. Since all subjective purposes are equally valid, no one has any obligation to hold a universal one and can abandon it if they find something else more important. Beyond the increased difficulty of alignment, a shared subjective purpose has no guarantee of real meaning. Just like if our entire crew happened to agree on a direction that has no port in it. While it is good that they have come to a consensus, we would know their efforts have become tragic because their goal is unachievable and their struggle arguably meaningless. To this end, the advantage of agreeing to use something more objective like a map is that it provides some assurance that what we are struggling for isn't meaningless. Like the decision to use the map, it seems the ideal solution to subjectivity is objectivity, or finding the least amount of subjectivity possible through rationality. By reducing subjectivity, we are provided with the closest thing we can get to objective purpose. If we are seeking an objective purpose, it naturally requires some kind of objective judge of purpose. There are very few really objective things in reality, but none of them judge the purposes we find in life more absolutely than time. Indeed, like our survivors, humanity is also racing against time. With the passage of time, some purposes survive and others die out in a process totally oblivious to human opinion. Ironically, this slow march of time inadvertently creates a hierarchy of purpose for us, as the things we can possibly find meaning in are erased with the passage of time. This doesn't necessarily make any purpose that remains objectively correct, but it does mean that every purpose has a lifespan, and some survive longer than others. This is the underlying principle of this work. Time judges meanings objectively and absolutely. It is the most solid basis for an objective purpose available to us, a North Star for the subjectivity of meaning. The rest of this work is discussing the logical steps and practical implications we can take from the objectivity of time to maximize our chance of living a meaningful life against the march of time.